Now I'm really very pleased I can hand over to another Claudia from Austria even. It's Claudia Wild, Dr. Claudia Wild. She's Chief Executive Officer of the Austrian Institute for Health Technology Assessment since 2020, but she was working as director of a similar health technology institution since its establishment in 2006. She is, I think, really known in the community for being a living HTA when people didn't know what HTA means. So I'm really pleased that you're here. You are really informed about what's going on regarding the new medicinal technologies. So Claudia, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. Usually Claudias are born in the 60s, but I think you're much younger than I am. And at this time, our parents were not very innovative in selecting names. Well, I will talk about medicines, but more at the end. At the beginning, I will talk about quite a lot of initiatives that happened that brought me to the point where I'm sitting here now and giving a presentation, because it actually I truly feel knowledgeable in the area of COVID-19 medicines, but this was up to activity, and the Austrian Ministry of Health started or asked us to start already in April 2020, which was quite early for Austrian standards to react that fast. So we were asked to set up a horizon scanning system, and I think the background that the ministry reacted that fast was that they had quite some memories back to the swine flu in 2009, when all ministries or all healthcare systems in Europe or in the Western world started to purchase Tamiflu, and only later it became apparent that Tamiflu is not really working well, but then already a lot of public money was spent already. That, I think, it's my interpretation why Austria reacted that fast. The second activity I want to report on is more or less a spin-off of the Austrian horizon scanning system. When EUNetHTA was asked by the European Commission to start reviews on upcoming medicines, and again, a spin-off was when in August of this year, the newly founded entity HERA was asked to set up an expert group on COVID-19 therapeutics that would come in the future. So it was more a prospective view. And again, another spin-off is that the platform trials which deliver enormously valuable knowledge on medicines, set up a joint access advisory mechanism to select ever more new incoming medicines that will be trialed in the platform trials. And thereafter, I will report about what I'm doing in my spare time on the TRIPS waiver on the policy level. So let's start with the Austrian horizon scanning system. So the aim of this was to inform, or still is, to inform health policy early at the national, but also on the regional European level, on which interventions might be used in COVID-19. And as such, to support preparation for an evidence-based purchasing, and to monitor permanently potential therapies that might be applied in COVID-19. But as I said, it's to have an alert system what not to purchase, or what not to invest public money in. So, but Austria, or we have not been the only ones, of course, because there are quite a lot of initiatives in this world. The biggest one is the COVID-End at the McMaster's University, and they have set up a system monitoring all clinical trials, and for the time being there are 4,000 clinical trials on COVID-19 medicines in this registry, and this is the actual databases for the horizon scanning system. So between April and now we have published 19 reports on monitored medicines, of which about 50% are newly developed ones, and the other 50% are repurposed drugs. The problem with monitoring the repurposed drugs is that many of them are, because they are cheap or they are off patent, the clinical trials are being done in the global south, and many of those RCTs carried out or being conducted are of very low quality, and therefore will never deliver the evidence we need to have in order to invest public money into those compounds. So there is a little bit of a dilemma on the one hand, that the enormous inflation of upcoming RCT or evidence from RCTs, but on the other hand, of very low quality evidence. So because of this Austrian initiative, the European Commission, in this case it was DG Santé, asked EUNetHTA, the European Network for HTA, to set some kind of early assessment program for new COVID-19 medicines. So we took the wording of the European medicine agencies, because they started with rolling reviews. So we lent this word of rolling reviews, which is nothing, which can be defined by living reviews, meaning that all incoming evidence is assessed on time, and those assessments change over time. So you can see all those compounds that have been assessed or have been monitored within EUNetHTA in a community of, I think there were around 20 European HTA agencies involved in this endeavor. Why I do use the present term is that unfortunately EUNetHTA ended by May 2021, and therefore the whole collaboration had to stop or stopped because there was no further resources available for this activity. But you can see, if you have some kind of knowledge on medicines in COVID-19, you can see that about 50% of those compounds that have been monitored died in the meanwhile, because there was enough evidence around that they did not work, and others are still on the market or are still monitored. So, as always, on the European level, there needed to be some kind of more precise methodology, what we are doing in this collaborative endeavor. And these rolling reviews consist of 3 elements of knowledge. The first one is based on RCTs, only RCTs. Those are for making statements on the efficacy of the monitored compound. The second knowledge puzzle is based on observational studies for making statements on the safety, on the knowledge of the safety of the monitored compounds. And the third knowledge element is on ongoing clinical trials, in order to make some statements on how much evidence is being to be expected within the next month or weeks or years to come, and who is making those RCTs. And again, since there's never enough resources to monitor everything in this world that is being trialed, because there are around, I think, 300 different compounds being monitored. We needed to define stopping and starting rules. By stopping rules, we mean that to stop the rolling reviews and start eventually a true assessment before for reimbursement decisions. So one of the stopping rules was when one of the compounds moved towards market authorization, or if more than 2 good high quality RCTs have proven the negative efficacy, so that the ineffectiveness of this compound, then why keep on going monitoring something if there's enough knowledge around that it does not work? Or if the decision to stop is taken collectively by those 20 agencies who were involved in this EUNetHTA activity. On the other hand, when do we start, or when did we decide to start something? Because promising, or all compounds are marketed well in the beginning and seem promising in early stages and later on. Therefore, we needed to have some rules when to start. And this is, for example, one of the was that there must be at least 2 phase 2 trials that look promising. Or if one of the compounds is being included in platform trials, because those platform trials have their own assessment process and they look closely which compounds to use in their trials. So those seem in the meanwhile old assessments, because the time or the evidence is moving enormously fast in COVID-19, in the assessment of COVID-19 assessments. But within EUNetHTA we assessed 4 compounds. The first one that was approved for COVID-19 was remdesivir. This was also updated ones. Then the only drug that has proven truly effective in critical care is dexamethasone, is corticosteroids. And the other ones I will talk about a little bit later when it comes to the drugs in the outpatient sector. Now I come to the third activity, the one I was talking about, that the new founded entity of HERA was setting up. And HERA was also the entity who was negotiating advanced purchase agreements for the vaccines. And they wanted to do exactly the same, or they still want to do exactly the same for therapeutics. To get better prices for the large European market. So they have set up a committee, an expert committee, and by August of last year, that was supposed to screen once more all compounds that are being tested in COVID-19 and to select those who are most promising. By August 21, I was already a true expert in COVID-19. I never have thought that I would be that much of an expert. But I was asked to be part of this commission, and Joel will, after me, will a little bit assess the work of this commission, I assume. So we were sitting together once a week for 3 to 4 hours and were screening diligently. Really, it was a lot of work. 320 compounds, what evidence is available for which patient groups, and selected those 10 compounds. And this was published in October of last year by the European Commission, and put the payers under enormous pressure that suddenly they were supposed, or they were asked to purchase them. Those compounds, but this is Joel's part, I will not talk for him, but it was also difficult for the HTA community to make decisions, or to recommend something that when not true evidence, and when I say true evidence is that at least 2 well done RCTs must be available, publicly available data must be available to recommend something. So it was a difficult task. So those 10 compounds were selected on the basis of this list of criteria, and it must have a sound scientific approach. It must be some kind of proof of concept already in a later stage. It must be available knowledge must be available from clinical studies. So evidence must be available already. And I think in Marco Cavalieri, he is the one who was actually invited also for this meeting today. He was part of this EC commission, and he gave a lot of information of not published evidence, and this was a bit the problem that we had, that we HTA had to trust that this data are not marketing data, but true data of good clinical trials. So this was the process for this commission, and then this list was published, and as I said, it put the public sector a bit under pressure to start purchasing those compounds. So the fourth initiative I want to talk about is that maybe you have you know that a lot in Europe, 3 platform trials have been set up, which is a very new but very efficient way of testing things from the perspective of the public sector, because there is a certain infrastructure, clinical trial infrastructure rather, that has been set up since years in Europe, but now it's being used for those platform trials. Each platform trial is trialing a certain patient community, like the critical care, the mild to moderate or extramural, and the hospitalized community. And this platform trial, the primary investigators, they meet once a week, and not only within the Europe community, but also with the recovery, with the WHO, with the UK, and with the US American platform trials, the so-called active trials. So they meet once a week and exchange knowledge on compounds, which ones they will include in the platform trials, which is necessary in that not in all platform trials always the same compounds are being used. So, and now since January of this year, they have set up a so-called joint access advisory mechanism, which is another expert committee I'm a member in. Why? Because a lot of manufacturer knock on the door and want to have their compounds being trialed in the platform trials. Why so? Because it's a cheap way to get into a large trials that are being paid by the public. So there is for the manufacturer, there's good reasons why they want to have their compounds in these trials, and this committee is overseeing the compounds who knock on the door, and is again assessing according to criteria, namely if this compound is already being trialed in humans before, so if there is any phase 1 or phase 2 trials evidence available. And again, we screen diverse compounds that are coming to the market in a certain time. And finally, this is really close to my heart, much closer than actually the other topics were, is that there always was a lot of public money going into the development of drugs and vaccines, but in this case, it was so obvious that the public invested or financed nearly 90% of the vaccine developments and a lot of the drug developments. And in Geneva, there is the Graduate Institute, and they are monitoring closely which R&D money is flowing into which company. And still the public purchasers were very naive in setting up the contracts without conditions that the prices for the vaccines and the drugs must be social compatible. because of this large amount of public money running into COVID-19 vaccines and medicines. There is a whole community not only monitoring the public R&D money going for COVID-19 medicines, but raising awareness for the need of conditions in the contracts and purchasing contracts. And this whole community is a list of non-governmental, how do you say it, NGOs, organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, many others, and they push very strongly towards to use the WTO TRIPS waiver to release the patents for medicines and vaccines in COVID-19. Now I come to the point where I talk a little bit about the hypes and then about the hopes. Maybe some of those examples you know from the media, from Mr. Trump, who was marketing some of them. Those are all examples that have been trialed early and now have died because there is enough evidence around that they do not work. Chloroquine and hydrochloroquine was not so much a topic in Europe, but in the US. Lopinavir and ritonavir is an HIV medicament and was one of the very first hopes. And again, the convalescent plasma transfusion was for a large time a hope, but failed. Ivermectin was a topic in Austria especially, and budesonide was hyped by the media as well because the IV corticosteroid proved as valid for critical care patients, but unfortunately the inhaled corticosteroids did not work. On the other hand, we have hopes, and in this case I only selected for the outpatients, but I assume that Joël will talk more about them. There are several antibodies, and again the first one is the Trump cocktail. At that time it was Regenkov, and meanwhile it has a brand name named Ronapreve. Bamlanimab, again a combination, a cocktail, antibody cocktail. In the meanwhile has proven not effective due to resistances to variants, to virus variants, and therefore Eli Lilly withdrew the market, not approval, it was not approved yet, but the marketing submission. Then there's Efzoheld, that is, and Xevudy, Rekirna, all of them are antibodies isolated from COVID-19, from the COVID-19 virus. And then there are antivirals, all of them, I'm not sure, all of them are in the approval process, but I think Leqvio is already approved, but I'm not sure yet, but they are already, those are the ones being pushed onto us. I tell you in a minute what the problems are. The problems is that the trials for those antivirals and antibodies are on older variants than the variants we have now. Therefore, one concludes that cocktails, namely two antibodies together, are better against the resistance against the variants. But we don't know if they are valid for Omicron, because they have been trialed either in Delta or even in earlier variants. The second one is that some of the, or most of those drugs are being applied in intravenous, meaning that people have to go to either outpatient and settings in the hospital or to their physicians while they are being should be used only for mild to moderate disease. And as we know, we are asked to stay at home when we have mild and moderate disease. We are not asked to walk around, and especially not walk to physicians or clinicians in outpatient hospital setting. So the mode of application is a huge topic, because the oral ones are the ones we are looking for. Then all those drugs have been trialed in unvaccinated patients, and now a large part of the population is vaccinated, and we don't know anything at all whether those drugs work in vaccinated ones as well. And for some, for those who is for that compound that is hyped most, it is Paxlovid from Pfizer. We don't have any data. There are only unpublished data with the EMA, but the public, us, is not does not have any access to published data, and therefore there is no way to assess them. Okay. I close with two further slides on that there are recommendations out there. There are several guideline committees that recommend something, and that recommend, in this case, it's the US treatment guideline panel, and they recommend those for drugs for the outpatient patients in order, meaning that Paxlovid is prioritized over Xevudy and over Veklury and Lagevrio. And it's more or less the same when we look at the WHO. But yesterday there was a new publication from WHO, so this is not the latest one. They more or less recommend exactly the same. And now I close at this point and hand over to Joel, because I assume that he has a much more critical perspective on this whole issue than I have.